On June 6, 1944, General Bernard Montgomery and General Dwight D. Eisenhower stood at the precipice of history, overseeing a mechanical armada destined for the beaches of Normandy. While Allied propaganda painted a picture of seamless cooperation, Montgomery's private journals held a jagged truth about the very tanks meant to liberate a continent. Was the M4 Sherman a masterpiece of industrial volume? Or was it a rolling death trap that the British commander viewed with visceral disdain? The true cost of American steel remains one of the war's most enduring enigmas. The year 1944 arrived with a cold, calculated urgency as the Allied High Command gathered in London to finalize the blueprints for Operation Overlord. Within the hushed corridors of Norfolk House, the atmosphere remained thick with the scent of stale tobacco and the crushing weight of responsibility. General Dwight D. Eisenhower, the Supreme Allied Commander, championed a strategy of overwhelming industrial might, believing that the sheer volume of American production would eventually crush the Wehrmacht under a mountain of steel. However, across the briefing table sat Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery, a man whose meticulous nature and obsession with professional standards recoiled at the compromises required by mass production. Montgomery viewed the war not merely as a contest of numbers, but as a sophisticated exercise in engineering and tactical refinement. His private diaries, often written in the solitude of his mobile caravan, reveal a commander who felt a profound sense of isolation among his American peers. He looked upon the M4 Sherman, the backbone of the Allied armored divisions, with a critical eye that bordered on contempt. To the public, the Sherman was a symbol of American ingenuity, but to Montgomery, it represented a dangerous adherence to quantity over quality. He noted with characteristic bluntness that the Americans seemed content to trade lives for logistics, a philosophy that clashed violently with his own desire for mechanical perfection and the preservation of British manpower. The technical reality of the M4 Sherman fueled this growing friction throughout the spring of 1944. Allied tank crews had already begun to refer to the Sherman as the Ronson, after the famous lighter, because it supposedly lit up the first time, every time, when struck by German anti-tank fire. Montgomery seized upon these reports, recording his anxieties about the Sherman's thin vertical armor and its tendency to incinerate its occupants upon impact. He watched with growing alarm as thousands of these machines poured into British ports, knowing that his men would soon be tasked with leading them against the formidable Panther and Tiger tanks of the German Panzerwaffe. In his private correspondence with the War Office, Montgomery pushed for the immediate acceleration of British engineering projects, specifically the development of the 17-pounder anti-tank gun. He recognized that the standard American 75mm gun was woefully inadequate for the coming struggle in the bocage of France. This obsession with upgunning the Sherman into what would become the Firefly was born out of a deep-seated lack of faith in the American military-industrial complex. Montgomery believed that if left to their own devices, the Americans would send Allied boys into battle with equipment that was obsolete before it even left the factory floor. The friction between Montgomery and Eisenhower was not merely technical. It was deeply personal and rooted in a fundamental disagreement over the nature of command. Eisenhower, the consummate diplomat, sought to maintain a fragile coalition through compromise and shared sacrifice. Montgomery, however, viewed compromise as a precursor to catastrophe. His journals reflect a man who felt he was the only professional among amateurs, often describing the American leadership as well-meaning but tactically naive. This sense of superiority was exacerbated by the mechanical shortcomings he perceived in American equipment, which he used as a proxy for his broader frustrations with Eisenhower's broad front strategy. As the D-Day invasion loomed, Montgomery's private writings became increasingly focused on the survival of the 21st Army Group. He understood that Britain, unlike the United States, was reaching the end of its available manpower. Every British soldier lost in a burning tank was a loss that could not be replaced. This demographic reality sharpened his critique of the M4 Sherman. He argued that the Americans could afford to lose 5 tanks to kill 1 Panther because they had 5 more waiting on the docks of New Jersey. But for the British, such attrition was a slow march toward national exhaustion. The mechanical debate reached a fever pitch during the final rehearsals for the invasion. Montgomery insisted on rigorous testing of the new British funny tanks, specialized armored vehicles designed to clear mines and breach seawalls. He viewed these engineering marvels as the necessary antidote to the basic, uninspired design of the standard American armor. When Eisenhower and his staff expressed skepticism about the complexity of these machines, Montgomery's private reactions were scathing. He recorded his belief that the American command was blinded by a Midwestern simplicity that failed to grasp the nuances of modern, high-intensity warfare against a professional enemy like the German army. On the eve of the invasion, the logistics of the war dictated a reality that Montgomery found increasingly difficult to swallow. The sheer industrial volume that Eisenhower celebrated was manifesting as an endless sea of Shermans stretching across the English countryside. Despite his protests, the majority of his armored units would be equipped with these American machines. Montgomery's journals from early June 1944 reflect a grim resignation. He wrote of his hope that the courage of the British tanker would compensate for the thin skin of their American mounts. Yet his disdain for the mechanical tools provided by his allies remained a festering wound in the heart of the Allied command. The tension extended to the very top of the British military establishment. Montgomery found an ally in Field Marshal Alan Brooke, who shared his concerns about the quality of American leadership and material. Together they navigated a treacherous political landscape, trying to ensure that British interests were not sacrificed on the altar of American production schedules. Montgomery's secret diaries serve as a testament to this shadow war, a conflict fought with pens and memoranda while the world waited for the guns of June to fire. When the first waves hit the beaches of Normandy, the mechanical flaws Montgomery had feared were laid bare under the merciless sun. In the chaotic shallows of Omaha and Gold, Sherman tanks were often knocked out before they could even clear the waterline. The swimming DD tanks, a centerpiece of Eisenhower's technical plan, foundered in the heavy seas, sending dozens of crews to a watery grave. Montgomery, watching from his command ship, noted these failures with a chilling lack of surprise. To him, it was a tragic confirmation of his belief that the Americans prioritized the grand gesture over the meticulous detail. In the weeks following the landings, the struggle in the Kane sector became a focal point for Montgomery's armored frustrations. The thick hedgerows of the bocage provided the perfect ambush sites for German Panzerfaust teams and concealed anti-tank guns. The Sherman's height, designed for ease of transport across the Atlantic, made it an easy target in the confined terrain of Normandy. Montgomery's journals from this period are filled with accounts of armored massacres, where entire British squadrons were decimated in minutes. He blamed the American designers for failing to provide a low-profile vehicle capable of surviving a modern battlefield. Despite the mounting losses, Eisenhower remained committed to his strategy of attrition. He believed that the Allied supply chain could outpace German destruction, regardless of the individual casualty rates of the tanks themselves. This logistics-first mentality was anathema to Montgomery. He saw it as a betrayal of the men who had to inhabit those steel boxes. His private contempt for American steel began to color every interaction he had with the Supreme Commander, leading to the infamous outbursts and diplomatic crises that nearly fractured the Allied alliance during the height of the summer campaign. The psychological impact on the tank crews themselves cannot be overstated. They were well aware of the disparity between their equipment and that of the SS Panzer divisions. Montgomery's staff officers reported a growing sense of mechanical inferiority among the men of the 7th Armored Division, the legendary Desert Rats. Montgomery recorded these sentiments with a heavy heart, noting that even the most veteran soldiers were losing faith in the tools provided by the Americans. This loss of morale was, in his view, a direct consequence of Eisenhower's refusal to demand better engineering from the American factories. By the time the Allies began their breakout from Normandy, the debate over the Sherman tank had become a permanent fixture of the High Command's internal discourse. Montgomery had successfully integrated the 17-pounder Firefly into his units, providing a much-needed sting to his armored formations. But the standard Sherman remained the ubiquitous symbol of Allied power. His journals reflect a begrudging acceptance that the war would be won with these machines, not because they were the best, but because they were the most numerous. It was a victory of the factory over the forge, a reality that the aristocratic British commander found fundamentally distasteful. As the narrative moves toward the liberation of Paris and the eventual push into the Rhineland, the shadow of Montgomery's private contempt continues to loom. The friction with Eisenhower would only intensify as the strategic focus shifted toward a single-thrust invasion of Germany, a plan Montgomery believed would finally prove the superiority of his tactical vision over American industrial volume. But the question remained, would the M4 Sherman, with all its perceived flaws, be enough to carry the Allies to the heart of the Reich? Or would Montgomery's warnings prove to be a tragic prophecy written in the blood of his men? The autumn of 1944 brought a biting chill to the European theater, and with it a renewed sense of urgency for the Allied High Command. General Bernard Montgomery, now elevated to the rank of Field Marshal, found himself embroiled in a strategic tug-of-war with General Dwight D. Eisenhower that would define the final months of the war. While the world watched the liberation of Belgium and the Netherlands, the secret journals of Montgomery remained focused on a singular obsession: the perceived failure of American armored doctrine. He believed the broad front strategy was a waste of precious resources, a logistical nightmare that played directly into the hands of a retreating but still lethal German army. Montgomery's frustration reached a boiling point during the planning for Operation Market Garden. He envisioned a bold lightning strike, a single thrust, that would bypass the Siegfried Line and seize the bridges over the Rhine. In his private writings, he argued that this plan required the highest quality of equipment and the most disciplined leadership. He viewed the American paratroopers of the 101st and 82nd Airborne with respect, but his disdain for the armored support they would receive remained unchanged. He noted that the success of the operation depended on the speed of the Guards' Armored Division, yet they were still largely reliant on the very American steel he had spent months critiquing. The failure at Arnhem became, in Montgomery's mind, another symptom of the Allied mechanical and strategic imbalance. While he publicly defended the operation as a 90% success, his private journals were far more critical. He lamented the slow progress of the armored columns along Hell's Highway, blaming the narrow roads and the vulnerability of the Sherman tanks to even the most basic German defenses. He recorded his belief that if the Allies had possessed a tank with the armor of the British Churchill, but the speed of a cruiser, the bridge at Arnhem might have held. Instead, he saw his vision of a quick end to the war vanish in the smoke of burning Shermans and the heroic but futile stand of the British 1st Airborne Division. Eisenhower, meanwhile, faced a different set of pressures. The American public was demanding a swift conclusion to the conflict, and the sheer momentum of the industrial volume he had cultivated was now the primary driver of Allied movement. In his meetings at Schaeff, Eisenhower emphasized that the war was being won in the factories of Detroit and Pittsburgh as much as on the battlefields of Europe. Montgomery's private reactions to these statements were dripping with sarcasm. He wrote of Eisenhower as a manager rather than a commander, a man who understood the price of everything but the tactical value of nothing. This fundamental disconnect over the role of technology and industry in warfare continued to erode the trust between the two leaders. As the Allies approached the borders of the Reich, the appearance of the German Tiger II, or King Tiger, sent a shockwave through the armored divisions. With its 88mm gun and nearly impenetrable frontal armor, the King Tiger was the physical embodiment of the mechanical perfection Montgomery had long feared. In his journals, he documented the terrifying encounters between British units and these steel behemoths. He noted that it often took an entire troop of Shermans to engage a single King Tiger, usually resulting in the loss of several Allied tanks before the German machine could be outflanked. This reinforced his belief that the Americans had fundamentally underestimated the qualitative edge of German engineering. The winter of 1944 saw the Allied advance stall against the frozen defenses of the Ardennes. During the Battle of the Bulge, the M4 Sherman was pushed to its absolute limit. In the sub-zero temperatures, the Sherman's narrow tracks struggled to find grip on the icy roads, while the wider tracks of the German Panthers allowed them to maneuver with relative ease. Montgomery, tasked by Eisenhower to take command of the northern shoulder of the Bulge, viewed the unfolding crisis with a mixture of professional alarm and a sense of "I told you so." His journals from late December 1944 reflect a commander who felt he was once again being called upon to save the Americans from their own lack of foresight. During the counterattacks in the Ardennes, Montgomery insisted on a methodical, set-piece battle, the kind of engagement he excelled at. He reorganized the fractured American units under his command, imposing a British sense of order and discipline. His private notes during this time contained sharp observations about the extravagant nature of American logistics. He was baffled by the amount of luxury items like turkey dinners and Coca-Cola that reached the front lines while his men were still fighting for better ammunition and spare parts for their tanks. To Montgomery, this was further evidence of a military culture that prioritized comfort and quantity over the grim realities of high-intensity combat. The relationship between Montgomery and the American generals, particularly Omar Bradley and George S. Patton, reached a nadir following a disastrous press conference where Montgomery appeared to take sole credit for winning the Battle of the Bulge. While the diplomatic firestorm raged, Montgomery's private journals show a man who was genuinely surprised by the American reaction. He truly believed he had performed a masterclass in leadership, and his critique of American emotionalism became a recurring theme in his writings. He felt that the Americans were more concerned with their bruised egos than with the mechanical and tactical lessons that the Ardennes had provided. As 1945 dawned, the drive toward the Rhine began in earnest. Montgomery's 21st Army Group prepared for Operation Veritable, a brutal slog through the Reichswald forest. The terrain was a nightmare of mud and floodwaters, providing the ultimate test for Allied vehicles. Montgomery observed the performance of the American-made Buffalo amphibious vehicles and the specialized British engineering tanks with a keen eye. He recorded his satisfaction when the British design modifications proved superior in the treacherous conditions, using it as a final justification for his long-standing skepticism of off-the-shelf American solutions. Even as the Allied armies crossed the Rhine and began the final encirclement of the Ruhr, Montgomery's private disdain for the Sherman remained a constant. He watched as the newer American M-26 Pershing tanks began to arrive in limited numbers, a vehicle that finally offered parity with the German heavy tanks. His notes on the Pershing were cautiously optimistic, though he couldn't resist a final jab, writing that the Americans had finally produced a proper tank only after the war was already won. To Montgomery, the Pershing was a late admission of the very engineering failures he had been shouting about since 1943. The liberation of the concentration camps in the spring of 1945 provided a haunting backdrop to the final collapse of the Third Reich. Montgomery, ever the professional, remained focused on the tactical execution of the advance, yet his journals reflect a growing awareness of the human cost of the conflict. He wrote of the thousands of burnt-out tank hulls littering the fields of France, Belgium, and Germany, a silent graveyard of American steel. He calculated the lives lost in those machines, a tally he believed could have been significantly lower had the Allied command prioritized armored protection over the ease of seaborne logistics. On May 4, 1945, at Lüneburg Heath, Montgomery accepted the surrender of the German forces in northwest Germany, the Netherlands, and Denmark. It was the crowning moment of his career, a victory earned through the very meticulous detail he had championed. Yet even in this moment of triumph, the friction with Eisenhower lingered. The two men would go on to hold the highest offices in their respective nations, but the scars of their wartime disagreements would never truly heal. Montgomery's secret diaries remained a repository of his true feelings, a private history that challenged the polished narrative of the Great Crusade. In the post-war years, as declassified reports and memoirs began to emerge, the debate over the M4 Sherman took on a new life. Military historians began to weigh Montgomery's private contempt against the undeniable fact of the Allied victory. They analyzed how the thin skin of the Sherman was the price paid for a global supply chain that could put thousands of tanks into the field while the German factories were being turned to rubble. Montgomery's obsession with British engineering was seen by some as a visionary pursuit of excellence and by others as an impractical distraction from the realities of total war. The psychological analysis of Montgomery's leadership reveals a man driven by a profound sense of duty to his soldiers. His contempt for American steel was not merely a matter of national pride, but a manifestation of his desire to protect his men from what he saw as avoidable danger. He was a commander who prioritized mechanical perfection because he knew that in the cold calculus of war, the quality of a man's tools often dictated whether he lived to see the peace. This human element, so often lost in the study of maps and armor thickness, was the true engine of Montgomery's descent. As the dust of World War II settled, the legacy of the M4 Sherman remained a complex tapestry of success and failure. It was the tank that won the war, not because it was the best, but because it was there in overwhelming numbers, supported by a logistical system that the Axis could never hope to match. Montgomery's secret journals provide a vital counter-narrative to the story of industrial triumph, reminding us that behind every strategic decision and every technological choice, there was a leader grappling with the heavy burden of command and the visceral reality of the battlefield. The final entries in Montgomery's wartime diaries are surprisingly reflective. He acknowledged the staggering power of the American industrial machine, even as he maintained his critique of its output. He recognized that without the American steel he so often despised, the liberation of Europe would have been an impossibility. Yet he never recanted his belief that a commander must always strive for the best, never settling for enough when the lives of his men are at stake. The enigma of Montgomery and the Sherman tank remains a powerful testament to the enduring friction between the man, the machine, and the inevitable outcome of war. If you were in Montgomery's position, would you have prioritized the safety and engineering quality of fewer tanks? Or would you have accepted the American strategy of overwhelming the enemy with sheer numbers? Let us know your tactical choice in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell.